Unexpectedly, the sweet old man who made friends with the birds in his neighborhood was pleasantly surprised when he encountered a peculiar raven that not only touched his heart, but also gave him a truly magnificent gift. Having spent his entire life in a small town on the outskirts of a forest, Jacob had a deep affection for his humble abode, which consisted of a cozy apartment featuring a balcony that overlooked the vast woodland. Since his early memories, Jacob would spend his weekend mornings relishing coffee and reading on the balcony, a tradition initiated by his beloved wife. The tranquil and serene environment that came with being in close proximity to nature had always appealed to Jacob's wife, and she shared this passion with him. Thus, every weekend the couple would spend cherished moments together, basking in the natural surroundings and inhaling the refreshing scent of the trees. For over half a century, they followed this routine until time eventually took Jacob's wife, leaving him to spend his moments of solitude on the balcony alone. Jacob did not let his wife's passing disrupt his weekend tradition. He opted to continue sitting out there, soaking in the sunshine and fresh air as a way to feel close to her. Jacob would often scan through the forest, remembering all the times he and his wife had explored the woods. He remembered the hikes, playing with their children, the fights that would happen when his wife would take a walk in their woods to clear her head. It was all sentimental to Jacob now as he navigated his grief. He explored some ways to feel connected with the forest, the most satisfying coping mechanism that Jacob found feeding the birds. It started on the 1-year anniversary of his wife's passing. Jacob wanted to give something to her somehow, like an offering of sorts, so he left his balcony and walked to the edge of the woods. He stood looking at the small cluster of stamps that made a little gap in the tree line. Those stamps used to be tall and proud trees until a massive storm had knocked them down rough decade prior. Since the storm, Jacob and his wife used to sit on those stamps to have heart-to-hearts, so he felt connected to her even though she'd been gone for a year. Jacob placed some seeds and leftover meat on the stumps in hopes that some animals would come eat it. He waited and waited, but nothing came. As the night got cold and the crisp air less forgiving, Jacob finally decided to call it quits. Hopefully overnight some critters would find the treats he left out. The next morning, Jacob stepped out onto his balcony and peered down to the area where he'd left the food. It was gone. Jacob felt joy and relief. He realized it made him very happy to give to others, and so Jacob invested in some bird feeders and a variety of nuts and seeds. He set up bird feeders, one on either side of the balcony and one on the edge of the forest to lead the birds to him. The next weekend, he set out on his balcony surveying the forest below. Many animals were tempted by the feeder closest to them, and Jacob waited patiently for the animals to spot the extra feeders he had at his home. It took a few weeks, but finally some small birds began to perch on Jacob's railing to eat from the feeders. This continued, and slowly but surely larger birds started to visit Jacob's balcony too. The largest frequent flyer past Jacob's home was a beautiful raven. It looked sleek and formidable with its ink, black feathers, and capable claws, adeptly grasping the rails. This remarkable bird caught Jacob's attention. He would save special bits of food, mostly leftovers from his own meals, to leave out for the raven. Because of this, the raven continued to visit. The meeting between bird and man became routine, and both slowly warmed up to each other. Jacob got so far as to be able to feed the raven treats directly from his hand, but he knew that it was significant because it made him feel less alone. Now, Jacob was fairly old. He was in his early 80s, and his health wavered periodically. As winter came to Jacob's town, he experienced awful aches and pains in his joints. His mobility was limited, and this made him more susceptible to health complications. That winter, Jacob fell ill. What started as a small cold soon became debilitating as Jacob battled pneumonia. He was not in the position to sit outdoors for extended periods of time or to walk out to the forestry, refill his feeders. So Jacob spent most of his time indoors, and the local birds moved on to eat elsewhere. This negatively impacted Jacob's mental health, and he entered into a decline. Believe it or not, there is much more to the story, because Jacob's goodness and altruism was returned to him in the presence of his favorite companion, the raven. While the smaller birds went on with their lives and forgot about Jacob and his feeders, this special bird continued to visit even after the food had run out. The raven would come by each morning to perch on the balcony. Jacob was encouraged by this, and he slowly started to regain his health. He would sit indoors and hang out with the bird through his screen door. Then when he was strong enough, he started to go back out to sit with his raven friend outside. He started eating again and bringing out leftovers. The ravens still let Jacob feed it, even if his hands were weak and shaky. This was a truly remarkable bond. In a way, they were helping keep one another alive. Then suddenly one morning the raven didn't come. Jacob was concerned. Was the bird all right? Had something happened to it? He decided to stay out there and wait. The air was fresh as winter thawed, and slow hints of spring sprouted from the ground. Jacob sat watching the activity, and life burst out of the hibernating forest. He knew his wife would have loved the view, so he watched it for her. The day slipped by until finally the raven came for a visit in the late afternoon. It had never gone to the balcony at this time of day, so Jacob was curious what was happening. He could never have predicted what the raven had done or how profoundly meaningful that day would turn out. Jacob offered the raven some food, but it would not open its beak. So if it wasn't hungry, then what was it doing there? Jacob scrunched up a blanket and set it out for the bird. He was concerned the raven had gotten injured and was in need of rest and healing. Jacob did what he could to accommodate the animal, leaving out food, water, and the makeshift nest made from a blanket. After much coaxing, the raven settled down on the blanket. She lowered her head and finally opened her beak. Out felt something small and metallic. It had nestled in the folds of the blanket, so Jacob could not be sure what it was. He thought of all the stories he'd heard of birds getting lead poisoning from eating scraps of metal and shrapnel in their prey. Was the poor raven sick? Jacob gently and cautiously stuck his hand out and grabbed the metal thing out of the synthetic nest. As he held it up to the fading afternoon sunlight, he was absolutely shocked to see what it was. He burst into tears as he realized he was holding his late wife's engagement ring. Jacob had thought that the item was lost forever, having been misplaced many years ago during a heated argument with his wife. During the dispute, she had taken a long walk in the forest and in a fit of anger, threw her ring into some nearby bushes. Despite spending weeks combing the area, the ring was never found, and eventually they gave up their search. However, as Jacob held the ring in his hands, it looked remarkably similar to his wife's ring, but he needed to confirm its authenticity. Carefully rotating the ring, he saw the inscription inside, which read, "With love forever." It was indeed his wife's ring. The mystery of how the raven had found it still eluded him. Jacob contemplated how the ring had suddenly become visible during the thaw that year, but then he pondered why the raven would bring it to him instead of keeping it in her own nest, as birds are known to do. It seemed like an unlikely coincidence. Jacob arrived at the conclusion that the raven was acting as a messenger from his wife, conveying messages to him. On that particular day, the message he received from his beloved wife was heartwarming. Even after her passing, she continued to love him just as much as he loved her, and it was through her that he had made a lifelong friend in the raven. Do you have an interest in feeding and befriending birds? Let us know in the comments section. I hope you liked this video. Please share and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.